there is a much more of an emphasis and attention on being human, being understanding, because you're not around these people every day at your desk in the office. So there's a lot that goes on that we don't see anymore.
Welcome to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge, a podcast exploring the latest trends, strategies, and insights in technology leadership. We'll discuss the most important topics and ideas shaping the industry today, from emerging technologies to digital transformation and beyond. Join us to learn all the juicy secrets of tech leaders, their biggest successes and failures, on our quest for gaining that all-important technology edge. So are you ready? Let's get started. Our guest today is Shea Belsky. Shea is an autistic self-advocate and changemaker. He is the Chief Technology Officer of Mentra, a hiring platform for neurodivergent job seekers. He graduated Cornell University with his BS and MPS in information science and has worked for companies like Wayfair and HubSpot on their accessibility and neuro-inclusion efforts. Shea brings several unique perspectives to supporting neurodivergent colleagues. He has been the manager of neurodivergent and neurotypical employees, has reported to neurodivergent and neurotypical managers, and has advocated for the needs and well-being of neurodivergent and neurotypical peers. Shea is excited to share these experiences with others to create a more neuro-inclusive workspace for everyone. Welcome to the show, Shea.
Thanks so much for having me. That's quite the intro, but I'm super excited to talk about neurodiversity and specifically talking about the management and leadership style as it comes to being neurodivergent and helping other neurodivergent folks become their own leaders.
Sure. So why don't we jump right into that? Like, what do you see as some of the unique aspects between working with, a neurodivergent staff member and someone who's not?
Something that I think really sets apart a neurodivergent leader from a neurotypical leader is their unique perspective, their story, and how they often look at the world or how they perceive the world, how the world occurs to them or how they present themselves to the world. It can be a thing where they're not afraid to take a step and do something that others might consider taboo or reckless or a little bit dangerous, but then ultimately ends up winning out something else. And alternatively, it can just be have a unique way of looking at a problem, looking at a challenge, and understanding either the individual components, the small pieces of the puzzle, or just being able to see how it all comes together. I really think the uniqueness of a neurodivergent employee comes from their perspective, their history, and how they translate things from their life into work and vice versa.
That's interesting. So it sounds like one advantage they would have is that they're more willing to take some risks that maybe some other people wouldn't.
It's a balance of risk taking. And neurodivergent people are all super different. So some of them are definitely really well equipped to take on a risk, take on a challenge. Others may be a little bit less eager to take on a risk or do something new. A big thing about autistic people, myself, for instance, might be that we need to be a little bit more cautious about doing something new. On the flip side, there are a lot of autistic people out there who are totally open to new things. It really is a broad range. And so it's really specific to the individual. But I would say on average that you either find people who are really big risk takers or folks who are a little bit more reserved regarding the risk taking. But all you need to know about that is just ask someone and talk to them about it.
Yeah, I always tell people that, like, one of the key things to ask any new staff member, for instance, is how do they like to be communicated with? Some people, go ahead.
Something that I really think is important to help understand neurodivergent employees without isolating or ostracizing them is helping them and your team more broadly create a working with me, manual of me type of document, sort of a living biography about how do I in a workplace operate? How do I function? What do you need to know about me? What is going on in my life? So on and so forth. This is helpful for neurodivergent people because they can say, hey, I am autistic and A, B, C, D, E, but it also helps everyone else too. So they can say, hey, I have a kid at home and at 3:30, I picked him up from the bus. So I'm going to be offline between these hours, but I'll be back on later. Or it can be, oh, I'm dealing with some stuff at home right now. So like I'll be kind of asynchronous or something like that. It has a lot of benefits for everyone, not just neurodivergent people. And that's a huge thing that comes up is how do I help a neurodivergent person succeed without isolating them, ostracizing them, or worse, discriminating against them?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great tip, especially in today's world where so many teams are working remotely. Um, I like that idea, and it's actually something I teach in my coaching program. Is I tell um, my executives to create like a staff directory, but instead of it being the typical staff directory of here they are, they work at extension whatever, and or this is their cell phone number, or this is their address. I ask them to put in things like that, like, I have children that I pick up from school between 3 and 4 every Monday to Friday, that kind of thing, so that when a staff member's setting a meeting, for instance, and they're getting frustrated, try to figure out, well, how come I can never get a meeting at 3 o'clock with them? They can look and see, oh, they're picking up their children at 3. Okay, fine, makes more sense. It creates a what's the word I'm looking for here? It creates an environment with the team where they have understanding of each other. And to me, that's a huge key element for them to work well together, because my goal with all teams that I work with is to try to drive their productivity to the maximum that you can. And if you're not understanding your teammates, that's a really difficult goal to achieve. So
There's so much of a human element to it. And especially with the pandemic, especially with the massive shift between hybrid, remote, in-person work, I think there's a lot of thrashing, a lot of turbulence around remembering the human. The idea of this manual of me document about me came when I was at HubSpot, which I was all remote at the time. And it was still really beneficial for me to see, okay, this is this person on their team. They pick up their kids at this time. This is this person on their team. They are having a surgery or an operation, so they're going to be out of the office from this time, so on and so forth. But I think, especially with how much further apart the last few years have been because of the pandemic, there is a much more of an emphasis and attention on being human, being understanding, because you're not around these people every day at your desk in the office. So there's a lot that goes on that we don't see anymore, especially with so many more teams being either all remote or hybrid or quasi in person, whatever word we're going to use to call it. It's a lot of things are getting missed now, that like the water cooler conversations, little micro conversations that happen, those don't happen as frequently as they used to.
well, yeah, I mean, even back to the example of someone taking off between 3 and 4 to take kids back home from school. You'd see that if you were working in an office with them. They would leave at 3, they'd come back at 4, and you'd know they weren't going to be available, but you don't have that physical view of what they're up to. So what do you think is one of the biggest challenges for a neurodivergent leader?
Really, a lot of the support and structure that comes about for neurodivergent employees in general is really focused on just getting them in at the ground level, getting them into the jobs for the first time. And there isn't a whole lot of support or leadership training or structure to help take them to the next level. It's like, okay, now you're here in this company, have fun. And that's kind of it for them. There's not a lot of support for them as a neurodivergent leader. And that, I think, has been the biggest struggle for me, just like rolling the dice on a lot of things, relying on mentors and advisors and people who I look up to help inform my own decision making. There's a lot of other, obviously, like management courses, like tutorials, LinkedIn Learning, Lynda, whatever it is, that are out there regarding how to be a leader. A lot of it still applies to a neurodivergent leader, but a lot of it, I think, either doesn't apply or doesn't, I think, educate people in the way that they need to be enriched or educated to for a neurodivergent leader. Something that I struggle with in my own life is conflict resolution. When I see a really uncomfortable thing, if I have to do an uncomfortable thing, how do I manage that as a neurodivergent person? And now how do I do it in a workplace? It's hard for anybody. It's really hard for somebody who's neurodivergent. So prepping someone for that, bracing it needs to be done very carefully. And there's almost no support out there unless you've done it already or know somebody who has.
So how can companies be more aware of this issue and provide the support that would be necessary?
A big part of that is definitely like exposing those people who want to become leaders to that training, but also doing so in a way that understands who each of them are uniquely, because a lot of these cookie cutter courses may not be as effective for a neurodivergent person as they would for a neurotypical person. It's going to be more questions, maybe more of an practice, more of an enrichment, more of a unique not hand holding, but more of a specialized, I would say, channel for companies to help their neurodivergent leaders become the leaders that they need to be. Whether that's just being a people manager and becoming an engineering manager, for instance. How do you go from being an individual contributor to being a manager? That's hard for anybody. For a neurodivergent person who has traditionally been used to just following instructions, now it's their job to figure out what other people should be doing. So it is a very unique path for neurodivergent people, and then it's unique for the individuals themselves. My struggles are going to be different from somebody who has ADHD or something else. They're going to have a different set of challenges that they face. So applying the same cookie cutter mold to both of us isn't really going to work. So the advice to companies is just to be collaborative with the process you're embarking on with that neurodivergent employee, because the cookie cutter, like right out of the box mold, probably isn't going to work as is.
So it sounds like you're saying, get the feedback from the person you're working with on what kind of support they need, what would be helpful to them in their position.
The feedback almost implies that it's like after the fact and after the course, after the program, after the training has happened. But I think it's important to be very mindful of things as they're in the middle of happening. So not just feedback after they got the new title or promotion, they're a manager now. It's working with them as they're training, as they're learning, as they're growing, and creating that supportive environment for them. I think the word I'm looking for is like being allowed to fail, being allowed to run into things and not know how to do it, but do it in a way that's supportive. When you're an IC, it's easier because you're rarely dealing with people or making decisions about people in a way that's going to really create significant lasting damage to a person. But as soon as you become a manager, that all changes. And so it's really interesting to create an environment where people can fail for people. And that goes for anybody, not just people who are neurodivergent. But with neurodivergent people, that environment where they are allowed to fail or allowed to screw up and learn from their mistakes is extremely important, kind of like a sandbox.
No, I agree with you. I think failure, I hate that word because it invokes like all these negative connotations, but it is what it is. But when something doesn't go as planned, it's usually a symptom of some other issue along the way. Didn't understand, they weren't trained. There's some other issue. And I agree with you. I think allowing people to have those moments where something doesn't go the right way, and then working with them to like figure out what caused it not to go the right way. How can we make sure that if you were to face this situation again, you could take it down the right path? Because you're right. As and let's say you're just a software developer, and so your job is just to sit there and write code. You're not going to have the kind of impact on the staff that you would if you were the lead developer who makes decisions on, which part of the code we're going to work on this week, etc. You're guiding people, and you're also setting policy. So you're the policy that you set, you kind of have to understand the group you're dealing with and how it's going to affect them positively or negatively. I think that's a good point. Is like too many people wait until put them through training, they've done all this stuff, and they assume that their training program is just spot on, only to find out that it really was lacking for certain people. Because and you're absolutely right about something. You keep mentioning like it's not just for neurodivergent people, and I actually agree. I think that if we were handling training our staff and onboarding our staff in the right way, wouldn't matter whether they were neurodivergent or not. You'd be handling it on an individual basis. You'd be working with that person on what will work best for them as an individual, rather than like this cookie cutter approach of here's how we do it. It works for everybody. Great. I mean, I understand that the process has to have some things that are in common, but there are some areas where I think there's forks in the road, and you have to decide, for this person, I'm going to go to the left, and for this guy, I'm going to go to the right. And it just makes the most sense. So what so you've got some diverse experience here. Like you worked with HubSpot. A lot of people tell me they've never realized that there are neuro-inclusion efforts inside of companies. How prevalent is that in businesses?
It's bigger than you think because there's two sides of it. There's how do we hire more neurodivergent people for organization, and then how do we create an inclusive and welcoming environment for the people who are already there. HubSpot has a disability community, and they had a neurodivergent community as I was on my way out of there. Wayfair has a disability ERG, and I believe that Google and IBM have very similar things, but it's been a long time since I've been with either of those companies. But for HubSpot and Wayfair specifically, they made a really big point about creating an environment where disabled and or neurodivergent people felt like they could talk with people who are like them, socialize, learn from each other, enrich each other, and also create meaningful, lasting change within the organization. At Wayfair, I was there when we founded the first accessibility working group, which was all about how do we increase the accessibility of our website, wayfair.com, for people who have disabilities that hamper their ability to look at the website. That could be things that are very obvious or very affecting on their life, like sight or sound or sensory or something else. But it also applies to people who are neurodivergent if it's like bright flashing lights, confusing information hierarchies, or other layout things that make it hard for someone to navigate between one page and the next. HubSpot had the same thing where their accessibility efforts were also taking off while I was there. And while I was there, they started partnering with Disability In to help their workplace and culture become more inclusive to everybody who is disabled, including neurodivergent folks.
Interesting.
So these things are bigger than you think. The question does become like, how much are companies celebrating that and championing them? Because if my next couple organizations after Mentra, whenever that is, I would want to prioritize a company that I know values neurodivergent individuals and also is championing that, is very proud of it. Because companies can have these initiatives, they can have these programs, but not tell anyone. They might feel like they're embarrassed or ashamed to talk about it, but why would they? The point of all these things is to feel proud of it and to feel really thrilled that you're creating an awesome environment for people. They're creating value within the company and for your organization. And that's something to be proud of. And that's something to say to people, hey, we are doing an awesome job creating a welcoming, meaningful environment for neurodivergent people. This is why you should work for us. And that goes a long way to people who are moved between one job and the next.
Yeah, I think the challenge is to come up with an approach that will be applied to each person equally. Because we do a monthly first Wednesday of the month meetup here in Las Vegas for entrepreneurs and executive types. And I was having a conversation this past Wednesday with someone because episode came out with a neurodivergent tech executive, and he was very open about struggles that he faces, and he kind of compared a person who's not neurodivergent having to face the same thing, and how the differences, what the differences pan out to be. And so this guy's like, yeah, that's exactly why it's so difficult to deal with, because it's discriminatory. Like you're giving the neurodivergent person a different approach than the non-neurodivergent person. And I said, that's kind of exactly the point. It's why you need to make sure that everything is the same. If you're going, for instance, like we talked a little bit ago about finding out, like you mentioned your manual of me, right?
Yep.
You wouldn't just do that for a handful of people. You would do that for everybody.
Exactly.
And that way everybody's being treated the same way. And you would also, in my opinion, as the manager, I would pull the same information out of each one of those for everybody. I'm looking for certain things. How do they work well? How do they work best with this? How do they learn? Like one of the questions I ask in every interview when I'm hiring someone new is what's your best method for learning? Some people read, some people like to do, some people like to watch a video. I want to know what your way is, because if you and I are both in the same department and our boss is giving us some training, maybe I learn from video, maybe you learn from doing. So he's going to have you train by doing the task. He's going to have me train by first watching a video. And there's nothing wrong with having a different approach to that. And I think that's where executives today drop the ball, is that they think that as soon as we start talking about making a more like flexible approach to things, that suddenly we're discriminating against somebody along the way. And they're so afraid of that, you know. And instead, if they were to just create an approach that they just dole out equally, and but all they're doing is tweaking it to the person's individual needs, I don't see how that's even an issue. Because don't we do that with schedules? Someone will say, oh, I need to be off at 4:30 instead of 5, so can I come in at 8:30 instead of 9? And people will say yes to that if that's something they want to say yes to. So is that discriminatory too? You know, like that's what I say to people all the time. So it's kind of a rant I have about that.
The idea is that the manual of me learning a different way and having it all happen is it creates equity. It's not about giving someone an advantage or a cheat code or a leg above someone else. It's about
Right.
creating an equitable environment where everybody has the capacity to be the most productive, be the most authentic, be the most welcomed in an environment. A literal example of this for a neurodivergent individual might be an accommodation for something innocuous like wearing noise canceling headphones or being in a low light environment. That might seem like cheating or an advantage to somebody else, but if it means that that person can do their work 3 times better, if it means it can be a lot less stressed, if it means they can focus and get stuff done, wouldn't you want that for that person? And it makes business sense too. Like, just using simple numbers here, if a good pair of headphones costs $75, which I think is reasonable for like a good, decent pair of headphones,
Mhm.
and you give it to somebody for their job, for work, and they're often flying and they're making thousands of dollars for you, that makes business sense. It's not a feel good thing. Like, it just makes objective sense to invest in your employees so they can print more money for you. But not just printing money, it's about like, you want them to feel like they can do the best work that they can do. It's not just about the finances. It's about them feeling like they're respected and included in that regard. And it is about that equity, that creating a level playing field that I think a lot of leaders get hung up on for accommodations and other things.
Well, yeah, like I actually asked that executive, I said, so are you telling me that every single person you work with is always just exactly the same opinions, respond exactly the same way to every single comment? Well, of course not. Everybody's different. Bingo. And that's why the approach needs to be different with everybody. And you know, you have, I think what people miss is, you know, there's a goal to training. Get the person to be able to do the thing you're trying to teach them to do. But the goal to training isn't to get them to do the thing you want them to do by forcing them to do it to learn it the way you want them to learn it. I mean, that just makes no sense. I know, like for instance, I had a project about probably 8 years ago now, and it was in an open office environment. Literally, no one had an office. The CEO sat in a cubicle, you know, and the walls of the cubicles were super low, like you could see over them,
Mm-hmm.
and it drove me crazy. I couldn't work. Same thing. I wanted to wear noise canceling headphones, and then they complained that, well, we call your name out and you don't hear us. Well, why are you yelling my name out? Like, we have Slack right here. Send me a Slack message. Come over to my desk, or can I come over to your desk and talk to you? Don't yell it across the office. That's silly. Um, but if I put those headphones on, suddenly I can get the work done. Take the
Yep.
headphones off, I can't. Which would you prefer? Right?
Yeah, like that's how it was for me at Wayfair. When I was at Wayfair, I said, hey, like, I wear headphones when I work religiously. If you need to get in touch with me, like, tap my desk, send me a Slack message. Don't touch me because that'll really freak me out. And people really chill
Yes.
about it. Like, to my benefit, no one ever gave me a hard time over it. I didn't even have to say I was autistic. I was talking about it openly at that point, but I didn't really connect the dots. I just said, hey, this is how I work. Please use these ways to get in touch with me. And like, also, my hearing is good enough where if someone is like calling my name loudly enough, I can hear it, or like on my
Clear.
like
Yeah.
peripheral vision, I can see someone standing here or here. I was only in person at Wayfair for a year before the pandemic. I've been working remotely more than working in person, which is really weird to think about.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the world was trying to head in the remote worker direction to begin with, and the pandemic kind of accelerated that. What I'm kind of surprised by is that it hasn't stuck with a lot of companies, because I mean, my own personal opinion is that you can make it work either way, but if you want to expand your the depth of the group of people you can hire from, remote work is great, because you can hire people from around the world literally if you need to. And I think I know that I've worked with some companies who they have issues with benefits and taxes and things like that. It gets complicated when you have employees living in a different place from where they work. But I think that's going to be something soon enough for government to, address. Like, this is how we can handle this as a, as a group of people. Because I mean, it's kind of silly that, I live in Nevada and, someone else lives in Texas. And so if I want to let them work from Texas for my company, I have to come up with a completely different approach to like benefits for them. That's silly. There should be a way to make it work for everybody. And that's once again, it comes right back to that whole, we try to use this cookie cutter approach for everything, and it just never actually hits the mark. So what would you say is like the number one, how do I put it? What's like the number one struggle you've had to deal with as a neurodivergent leader coming into a new role?
Biggest thing is people assuming they know everything about me if I talk about my being autistic or neurodivergent. That's not to fault people because it's their first instinct. When you think of somebody who's blind, generally, not to paint every blind person the same way, but for the most part, people who are blind or hard of seeing have a shared set of problems that they encounter on a daily basis with regards to sight or their environment. And many of those problems can generally be addressed in the same way. Not all of them, and not 100%, but generally that's how it works. For neurodivergent people, that is absolutely not true. If you have two autistic people, you have two autistic people, but they are very unique and very different. My struggles as an autistic individual can be very different from the autistic person that you know, or that you know that someone else knows, etc. And the biggest thing that I face is that when I introduce myself and I say, hey, I'm autistic, people immediately assume that I behave exactly the same as whatever their other autistic person that they know about is. If it's a family member, if it's a friend, if it's from television, movies, like they automatically associate me with that other knowledge they have about autism, unless I stop them right there and say, and this means A, B, C, D, E. I have to correct the definition for myself almost immediately, lest they try to redefine what it is for me without listening to me. And that works most of the time, but some people don't want to hear it. They only assume I behave like their Uncle Bruce or something like that. It's complicated in that regard. Or they'll just, if they don't have a relationship with somebody who's autistic, they'll pull one in from movies or TV shows like Sheldon, Big Bang Theory, Rain Man. There's millions of caricatures of autism out there, many of which are exaggerated or inauthentic. And that's sort of what I get typecast as, unless I say something very clearly about it.
No, it kind of surprises me in a way what your answer was, but at the same time, as I think about it, what you're saying, it makes sense, because it's the overarching, like, that's the impact you're going to get from someone if they misconstrue who you are and how they expect you to act. It's going to change the dynamic. And so it's kind of important to correct that right away and make sure they understand, hey, I'm this individual, I'm not that individual. And these are the way I like, this is how I like things. They don't like it the way you think I like it. Just interesting. I feel like most people they're not as observant. So unless you bring up, you're autistic, they might not even notice. And people miss it.
Yeah, like most people in my previous workplaces would have no idea I was autistic unless I was, except for me being so open and outspoken about it. If I didn't say anything, no one would ever comment on it to me. And I might only say something to my manager, and that would be it. But I'm of the mindset that I want to break down these barriers. I want to talk about it more to make people more comfortable. I meant to talk about, that's when I talked about the ERGs and HubSpot and Wayfair and stuff. But the idea of seeing somebody in leadership or decision-making capacity being open about their neurodiversity, about their disability, goes a really long way to breaking down that stigma, breaking down those barriers, to creating that inclusive environment. At HubSpot, for instance, they have disability community. And the executive sponsor of that is like a vice president or something. I'm blinking on her name. I'm sorry, I don't remember it right now. But the idea is that this very prominent, very important individual in HubSpot, like there's maybe one or two people above them and that's it, has a disability, and they are the sponsor of their disability community. And that's huge about talking about accessibility, talking about disability inclusion, talking about creating equity. And it makes it much easier for people who have their own disabilities to talk about it with their managers, with their teams, because that barrier has been broken by somebody else. A big step forward.
Totally.
And on my teams, I try to do that as well. People can talk to me about it. Other people can talk about it openly as well. I try to do that on a much smaller scale with companies I've been at before and with my own startup, Mentra. And Mentra is a whole other can of worms, which is really fascinating and exciting as well.
Yeah, no, I think that I actually think that Mentra is something that is a well-needed resource in society today. Because I think that, well, like I think for one thing, I think it's great that you're so open about all of this, because a lot of people that I've spoken to, that I've worked with in the past, they keep it under wraps because they say, oh, I don't want to feel like a circus animal, you know, or have people treat me differently. But I think that the reason people treat people differently when they first find out is because they don't know enough about the situation. They don't know anything about it, actually. And by educating them on it, you make it so that it is a comfortable conversation that you can have, and you interact in more comfortable fashion than where you're just always uncomfortable and wondering, you know, am I supposed to ask this question? Am I supposed to say this? Just be yourself. You know, I mean, that's pretty much the answer.
And that's what Mentra is really all about. Mentra is kind of serving a couple of purposes. One of them being supporting neurodivergent job seekers to get them jobs. The other is helping companies with their own efforts to become neuro-inclusive and create a better environment where people can be authentic about themselves, be genuine, and come out to their team openly and say, I have ADHD or I have dyslexia, and not feel like they have to hold anything back in that department. There's really two sides to the idea of neurodiversity in the workplace. There's how do we get people hired, and then how do we help people feel like they want to stay and feel really included. And some companies do one or the other, but not both. And Mentra really tries to tackle both, because you can't have one without the other. If you hire people, they don't want to stay, they'll just leave. And if people want to stay, but you don't hire them, then they'll leave eventually. Not for a while, but they will eventually leave for one reason or another. And Mentra is really seeking to tie it all up into one shot with helping job seekers, helping employers, and helping organizations and advocates who work on behalf of a job seeker to help them get jobs. People like career coaches, people like job placement agencies, people like rehabilitation agencies, and other organizations who work on behalf of a job seeker. It's really exciting and scary stuff. And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't daunting and challenging, but I do really enjoy it.
No, and I love your mission to do that. I think you deserve a lot of kudos for that. It's much, like I said earlier, it's much needed in our society today, to help with that situation, because it's a segment of people that are completely misunderstood. And unless somebody's opening up, you're peeling back the onion and opening up the curtains to show what's behind there, and that, hey, you know what? I'm just like you. I just, you know, think about things a little bit differently, and I approach things a little bit differently. I used to have a boss who would say, you know, I don't understand why you always need to know the why behind a decision. Well, because I can't execute if I don't know the why. Like, I just physically can't do it. That's what you need to understand. Like, you could sit here and ask me all day long, but if I don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, I don't want to do it. And I told him, I can't truly explain to you why. I just know that my entire life, this is how I've been. And that ought to tell you something about how people deal with other people. They do expect to, I'm hiring an assistant. All assistants do X, Y, and Z. Well, that's not true. And I think the sooner people realize that stuff, the better. And honestly, it isn't just about neurodivergent staff members, leaders. It's everybody. I mean, we all come from different perspectives in life. We all come from different backgrounds, and it causes us to have a way of doing things that might be different from somebody else. And understanding that's the key to successfully working with that person. So, well, this has been a really intriguing conversation. I really have enjoyed it. You're the second person in a row on the show with this topic, and yet we actually went in a completely different direction. So, why don't you let the people know where they can find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Shea, Shea Belsky, B as in boy, Elsky. There's only one of me. You'll find me on LinkedIn. If there's another one of me, let me know and I'll deal with it very quickly. I'm on LinkedIn. My website is sheabelsky.com. Email is hello@sheabelsky.com. If you misspell my name, it'll still come back to me at some point. Just type in Shea Belsky, autism neurodiversity. I'm sure it'll come up. The search engines work in mysterious ways these days. So you'll find me one way or another. And my company's name is called Mentra, Mentra. We're all over the place. We just got in TechCrunch the other day. So you'll find Mentra as well if you search us on the internet.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here. I really have appreciated it.
Thanks so much, Mike. Take it easy. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. We hope you've had a great time with us, learning everything you need to know to stay ahead of the technology curve. Remember, be curious, be updated on all of the latest trends, and show them who's boss. Until next time, we'll be back with plenty more techie tips and tricks so that you can stay on top of your game.